You know what this means. Her butt was in my face. Hello, welcome back to my channel, and this is going to be a kickoff video of starting my series of creating art with unusual mediums, and what I mean by that is not mediums plural really, but it's more of like the soap making variety. So if you know me personally, or if you've hung around the channel for a little bit, you know that I make soap. I've been making it for about 13 years now, and I've kind of turned it more into an art. But I really like making soap because it's the scientific part of me coming out with the artistic side, and I've kind of merged the two together. So anyway, so this video is going to be the fundamentals of forms. So I kind of came up with that term. There's no like soap making term for that, but it's basically like the different types of phases that soap will go through, and the different kinds of designs you can create with those different phases, because they're all different and you can only achieve certain looks with certain phases. So yeah, so this video is going to be a fundamentals of form. Okay, I'm going to start off by illustrating the differences in the traces of soap by these three little materials here. So on the far left hand side is a little shot glass of eggnog, and that is kind of, I know it's a random thing to have in your house, but it's fluid, but it's not like water, so it's still got a thickness to it, but it's still pretty fluid. And that's kind of what you're looking for when you're looking for a light trace. It still falls in itself. You can pour it, whatever. So in the middle there, it's kind of a mixture of yogurt and kefir, which is a yogurt drink. So it's got a thickness to it. It's thicker than light trace, but it's not thick trace. And you can see on the edges of the glass there that there's some film on the side. So that kind of illustrates how thick this is relative to the eggnog. And on the whole right hand side there is a dollop of Greek yogurt. This is the Fage brand yogurt, which is like super thick. Not a whole lot of liquid in there at all. And that's kind of what you're looking for with thick trace. It's like got some heavy body to it. It's good for piping. It'll hold its structure. And it's also kind of a signal that your soap is approaching its end of time that you have to play with it, really. Depending on the recipe, it can start really going into soap form at this phase, or it can kind of hang out in this phase for a little bit and give you some time, like especially if you're piping some of those recipes for piping, it'll stay that way for a little bit. But for the most part, get your soap in the mold and get it going. So some soapers come across this phenomenon as known as ricing, and here I have a picture of cottage cheese to kind of illustrate that fact. And you're going to get, with ricing, you're going to get kind of a separation effect where you're getting like this fluidy part, but then you're getting this coagulaty part. And it's just, I mean, it can be fixed a lot of times, but sometimes it's just kind of the incompatibility with your fragrance oil and your recipe. I haven't really encountered too many recipes that do this alone without fragrance oil. It's usually the fragrance that's incompatible. So if you want to add fragrance to this, make sure that you're researching which ones you're getting and that they don't cause this effect. Okay, so I'm going to start with the first phase of soap making, which is considered light trace. So as according to the previous photo, you could see that light trace is kind of like an eggnog-y, kind of just a fluid, thick but fluid medium. So anyway, one of my first soaps that I'll show you here is, I don't have a name for it, but it's this green, and like I don't have the other parts colored, so that's like a natural soap color, green and natural soap, in the pot swirl. That's the name of the technique. And you can see that it's very feathery, just very light and feathery, because when you're mixing two very fluid things in an abrupt way like that, it's going to come together sort of like that. Another technique, this is called a spoon swirl, but I did not use a spoon. I just used squirt bottles, like condiment bottles for like ketchup and stuff like that. You can buy empty from Walmart or whatever. But this is my January Embers soap, which I do have a video for, and I'll link it up here for you. But you can see here that there's a lot of I don't even know how to explain it. So the only way I could achieve this effect is through the light trace. So in the condiment bottle, and you'll see in the video if you decide to look at it, I basically just swish back and forth in the mold like that, alternating colors, and it gets like kind of this effect here. But you can't, I mean, you can kind of do it with medium trace, but it's best to do with light trace. All right, the next phase I'm going to go through is the light medium trace. So it's somewhere in between light, not quite medium, but it's thicker than like the lightest light. So I have here a drop swirl. You can see, so this is David's Dance, and I do have a video of this as well, and I will link it up here if you are interested in looking at that. So I had a base color that I didn't do anything with. I just colored the base, you know, this kind of antique silver. It looks brownish, but it's supposed to be antique silver. And then dropped in some in the pot swirl, which utilizes kind of a light trace. So you can see in the swirl itself, I don't know how well you can see that, but in the swirl itself, there's like the light trace because you can see that feathering from the first soap. But you have to have kind of a medium to be able to drop it in there. If it's too thick, it'll just sit on top. So if you have a light trace soap dropping in, it has to be like not that much thicker, I guess. So this is kind of in between light, medium. And then the top is like a peacock swirl. So it's kind of a medium, which isn't ideal for a peacock swirl, but it's okay. It kind of lends an interesting texture. And this one here is the Hip Hop Drop, which is also a video on my channel. And this one is a little bit different than David's Dance because this base here is the medium trace. But then I had this light trace drop, which it's a much bigger drop. This is a better view. But it's also, you can see the feathering and the swirling of all the different colors in there. So this is kind of a light trace as well. But I had to let it thicken up a little bit so I could do the pencil line on there, this black pencil line. And then in order to be able to layer this next layer on top, it had to be, this part had to be kind of closer to thick trace so that this didn't break through to the next layer. Okay, the next phase I'm going to go through is actually medium trace. So this is beyond light trace. This is like medium trace. It's kind of like that thicker, richer, kind of like, if you're familiar with kefir, like that yogurt drink, it's kind of like that. And so I have this one here, which actually is a mixture of medium and light. So don't pay attention to the top. But the innard here is medium trace. So in order to be able to get that defined lines, I guess you can kind of see that, the defined lines between them, you have to have some kind of density difference that you just can't get with thin trace. So thin trace would just fall into itself, like it would just mix up, and it's thin enough like you could get muddy colors and whatever. So you have to have that medium trace where it's got enough structure to hold its own color layer together. So that's what we have here with this feather. Once I let it thicken up, then I pipe the top, but we'll talk about that here in just a second. So if you're a Game of Thrones fan, this is my my weirwood tree soap. It's not the best, but you can see that there's definitely a face. He's got his bleeding eyes. So this is also medium trace. So I actually was going for a face. So I didn't want the colors to get muddy, and just like in the feather, you need to have it enough structure so that when I layer the next layer on top, it's not going to break through, which you can kind of see it did break through a little bit right here, but it's not going to break through too much to where it's going to destroy like the feature that you're looking for. And same with the eyes. The top, I had left some of it kind of thinner so that I could get this like fluid, pay no attention to this blemish, but it's more of a fluid look to it. Okay, and the final phase of soap making, well, this is actually cold process. So there's hot process, which is a completely different thing. But in the last phase of the cold process is the thick trace. And thick trace is good for things such as layering. So this is my geometric soap. My layers aren't perfect because I get impatient and I just kind of throw it on there. But these layers are thick, had the structure to be able to sit there. This was an initial layer that I had poured and then let sit so that it could harden up so that I could do these, because I have to tilt the mold to get that angle. And if I had tilted it back to like be able to pour these layers, it just would have flushed over. So I had to let it solidify. But anyway, so thick trace is good for layers, and it's also good for piping. So this is my green clover and aloe soap. I was actually experimenting with piping for the first time. You have to have this like a really nice and thick trace, because if you've ever piped if you've ever piped real icing like on a cake or frosting on a cake, in order to keep this form, it's got to be real thick. If it's like runny, it's just gonna like blob out. So this is probably the last phase of thick trace before you really want to get your mold just put away and let the soap do its thing. This is where you want to be. And earlier I showed the feather, the Blue Island feather. I did the same thing here. So I actually put a portion of this away and let it solidify or get harder while my soap mold was just sitting, protected. And then once it got hard enough, then I piped it on top. But this one here, I just have a plain base, poured it. I had to let this solidify a little bit too so I could pipe layers on top. Otherwise it would just blop right through, and what's the point? So yeah, so that's thick trace there. And I love how this yellow one turned out. It's just so nice and crisp. And then these leaves are pretty cool too. I never really used the leaf pipe tip, but anyway, that's neither here nor there. But that's thick trace right there for you. So I know this video wasn't me actually making soap, but it is the first part in this Fundamentals of Form series of creating art with an unusual material. So it's good to have that foundation to understand what you might encounter when you create soap. So your thin, medium, and thick trace. And next time I will be creating a batch of soap, and I will walk you step by step through what is going on while I'm making it. And I haven't decided how long this series is going to be yet, but I don't know, stay tuned. So if you're interested in purchasing any of these soaps, they are listed for sale on my Etsy site. Just look for Left Brain Liz, and I have it linked in the description below as well. And if you're interested in subscribing to my channel, just click on my portrait on the right. If you'd like to know when I update, just click on the bell. And if you liked this video, just give it a thumbs up, and see you next time for a faux funnel pour. Bye!